Welcome, dear listeners, to the Speak in Flow podcast, where we dive into strategies, experiences to help you and your team achieve maximum potential and flow. Today, I have a wonderful leader. She's near and dear to my heart. I've known her for many years. Cari Stieglitz. She's the co-founder and president of K-Volve. Hi, Cari.
Hi.
I'm so glad we're doing this finally.
I know.
You're in this amazing space of technology, construction. Can you tell the audience more about what you do and what is exciting in your world?
Yes, of course. Well, my team, I think, has a unique skill set in that we translate business process into technology. So what that means is we meet with teams, we figure out what's working, what's not working, and then we help to kind of standardize the process and use technology to digitize that process so it can be repeatable across a larger group of folks.
Right. I mean, because when I think about team, I think about them separately from technology.
Right.
And it's so integrated in our world today, especially having gone through COVID. And so, what are you seeing in terms of virtual teams, and how that impacts like some of the challenges that we've had since COVID with integrating virtual teams?
Yeah. And I love that you're asking that because I feel like we got over the pandemic and we kept moving, not
Right.
fully recognizing that some of these impacts were still happening. So when I look at virtual teams, I really like to think about the differences between our experience of being in person and what we have to do when we're virtual. So in some cases, I've never actually met people I've been collaborating with for 6+ months in a face-to-face situation. And being face-to-face with someone, having those casual downtime moments, the water cooler moments where you can just casually talk about somebody, connect with somebody, that's going to be a very, very different experience than somebody that you have to work with on a virtual basis and not have that in-person connection.
Mm-hmm. And so, what are some of the challenges that you see? Like, it's different. So it's different. And maybe the water cooler Slack is replacing the water cooler.
I mean, it's trying to.
It's trying to.
It's trying
Yeah.
to, especially even Microsoft has gotten a little more casual with the ability to put in
Right.
GIFs and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of the biggest challenges are knowing how and when to use different virtual tools.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the perspective of the right level of communication, knowing that we have a
Mm-hmm.
gap in that human connection with somebody that we would experience in person. My saying is always over communicate. When you're
Right.
working in a virtual team, it's totally different than just being able to look over at somebody and be like, hey, Bob, what do you think about this, that, and the other?
Mm-hmm.
It's a very different experience. So getting connected as a team, getting collaborative as a team
Mm-hmm.
is a big challenge. It takes a lot longer, in my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
which is another challenge to really establish that trust. So those are probably the top three that I can think of is the level of communication, using the tools correctly, and just acknowledging that it is different and, accommodating for that.
Yeah. And then what about timing? Right. There's difference in timing.
Yeah, especially so
Yeah.
are you talking about like the time of day people work?
That too, and then I think with regard to email
Mhm.
versus like yeah, there's just it's disjointed. And where do
Yes.
we find everything?
The
Yeah.
gap in timing of communication. I think that
Yeah.
is definitely challenging as well, because it's not really a
Yeah.
conversation, is it? You think of an email
Yeah.
exchange as something different from a conversation.
Right. Right. And so what are the impacts that you're seeing that organizations are having when these things are not addressed properly?
Yeah, I mean, I would say just experiencing working on projects. Again, most of our experience is working on projects pre-COVID, we would almost always go out on site for at least a week or two in the beginning, get to know people, do some in-person facilitation with sticky notes. Same thing with new team members being brought on. You would have a way to kind of connect with them face to face at a certain point. So I think some of the outcomes is honestly a lack of trust or a slow to establish trust within a team or within a project environment, because there's just something different about being face to face with a person in the same room and being able to see their small mannerisms or how they conduct themselves, or them, casually talking about their dog or their children. All of these things help to establish trust within a group of people. And because those casual moments aren't available as much, or I'll say they're less accessible to have casual moments with a virtual team. I think it takes a longer time to build trust, which of course brings on additional challenges of trying to work through some of the hard things when those hard things come up.
Oh yeah. And I mean, hard things are going to come up. And then so
Of
when
course.
there's a lack of trust, it stalls, people don't do anything, and then you really don't, and I think it can be difficult to pinpoint exactly what just happened.
Exactly. Yeah. Because, it's hard to say, oh, I don't trust that team member, because
Right.
I actually do trust them, right? I'm trusting them to do their job. I'm trusting them to show up. I'm
Yeah.
trusting them to speak to me honestly. But there's a different level of connection and inherent trust that
Yes.
I think forms when you have two people in the room face to face.
Right, right. There's a synergy. And what about silos? How does that impact? Does it create some silos? Have you seen working with a company where there's been some silos that has happened because the information is not passed down?
Yeah, and I would
Hmm.
say there's a big difference, just in our projects where we have a group of clients that they'll all get in the same conference room because they're co-located. So they may
Hmm.
be like, well,
Hmm.
we don't need you to come out. We don't really want to have the additional travel expense associated with that, but they'll all
Right.
stick it in a conference room and have that human experience with each other. Comparing that to a team that hasn't yet kind of prioritized some in-person time, they'll have
Hmm.
disconnections within themselves, which is another
Hmm.
layer that we need to kind of work through when we're talking
Hmm.
about trying to get everybody on the same page to have a standardized process. We're all agreeing we're going to do the same steps at the same time.
Hmm.
There's
Hmm.
another layer of them kind of saying, well, wait, what about this? What about that within each other? And then, so we're working through that conversation within their group, as
Hmm.
well as the conversation of us trying to actually standardize and digitize that process.
Yeah, yeah. So what are your recommendations? How do you know when to meet in person versus virtual?
Well, if I had my
Yeah.
way, I would always start a project in person.
K-
At least a day where you get to just be around each other, kind of experience that. There are some tricks that I think
Yeah.
help kind of break down some of the initial things. Some
Hmm.
people have it as simple as tell me your favorite fruit, because that's just getting a
Hmm.
little bit of accessible vulnerability to come out.
Hmm.
One of my favorite exercises is to have people draw an animal that best represents them. So I'm asking them to draw something, which most people don't love to do, and then also kind of get a little deeper in what that is. And so since everybody in the room has to do it, there's a little breakdown. So I love exercises like that that kind of
Uh,
get everybody going. And those types of exercises, I think, are best done in person. And then once you kind of get that moving, if you're trying to save money on a project by not having travel expenses, then great. After that moment, maybe not do it in person. But yeah, early on, trying to get everybody in a room together so you get some of that initial barrier, the storming, norming, forming, performing,
yep.
the initial forming piece, the quicker you can get over that hump and start to get
Right.
to performing, the better. And I think in person early
Right.
on really helps with that.
So what is Carrie's animal? What are you? What have you? I'm so curious. That's the only thing I've been thinking about right now.
I know. And it's so funny when you ask some people. Luckily, I've done the exercise a lot, but mine's a fox. So,
Nice.
playful, but
Ooh.
also can get a little serious and strategic
Uh-huh.
at the same time. So,
And I
like,
was trying to think about it for myself. Does a phoenix count?
yes, 100%. Yes.
Love it. Love it. Rise from the ashes.
Yes.
They're beautiful and yet graceful, but also fiery and,
Yes.
doesn't, they evolve. We
Yeah.
evolve. So
Yes. I love
yeah,
that. I
love
love
it.
that.
Love it. Now I can see the fox in you. I can see
Yeah.
it. Great. Well, I mean, that's so helpful, at least in the beginning of the project, get through because again, the stages of team forming nor storming is gonna come. Like it's
Yeah.
not when, it's just or if, it's when. So having the in-person getting to know each other, learning about each other at a deeper level, whether it's like what animal are you, or
Mhm.
what communication preferences. I have a communication preferences profiling system that I like to use with teams. So you get to know different people's what
Yep.
they lean with, what they prefer to use as communication style. And so those are so important
Yep.
to navigate. Then when they go through the storming, it's faster so they can get into productivity and performing.
Yeah. Yep.
And I love that. And then what are the tools that you suggest afterwards, or you mentioned the other challenges that you don't know to the extent what communication, that's important too, because like, do I send an email about this topic, or do I
Mm.
text, or do I pick up the phone, or do I have a video call? How do you know? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you I've learned from personal mistake
Yeah.
that there when not to send an email.
Right.
Um, so I feel like, it's, especially kind of as a leader or a manager, having hard conversations, it's easier on
Yeah.
us to have them via email, but it's never easier on the recipient of that information. And so I always like to try to deliver anything that might be hard or nuanced via phone call. That's been a huge shift from early in my
I have
career.
a question though. Do you
Yeah.
do you say like, "Hey, I got some bad news," or do you just say, "Hey, Cari, I need to talk to you," and then not even have a preface
Yeah.
of
So I have regularly scheduled meetings with most people, even if they're not my direct reports.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so
yeah, that's
comment
good.
like having communication frequently, and I don't remember
Right.
what it is now. It's 8 positive things for every 1 negative thing. So if you don't have that continuous positive communication on a regular basis, when that a corrective behavior comes up, you're going to have to say, well, have I really balanced this out?
Right.
People like to come up with things like a compliment sandwich. Well, in that moment, if you haven't been putting
Mhm.
all this time and effort of establishing
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
foundation,
Mhm.
that critique or criticism might come as really off balance. And so you're
Right.
working the whole time on making sure that you're communicating positive things. And then, when the storming happens, that's the other thing too. And of course, I could do better. Everybody could do better on making sure that we're constantly giving positive feedback. It's the challenge, that everybody needs to continuously work on. And it doesn't have to, people always think, oh, it has to be something insane. No, you could just be like, great email. Because if I read an email, I'm like, oh, that was so well written, and I don't communicate that, then I'm just over here filling this. That was like a really great email, but that person who wrote it
Mhm.
doesn't experience that positivity. And so that's the stuff that I like. If I'm feeling, oh, I read this and I really felt like that was written well and it was very succinct and it
Right.
really communicated the point, but I don't use that opportunity to just be like a quick ping, that was a really great email, then that's a lost
Right. Right.
opportunity. So um,
Yeah.
then when it comes down later, then, if you haven't over communicated all of the other things, then it's a little
Mhm.
harder. Yeah.
Uh-huh. And that makes total sense. And especially because we have a lot going on. And so sometimes we think, oh, we don't really need to do that. But like as you said, when we're having conversations and when a difficult one happens, at least you have some trust, some
Yeah.
level of trust, some level of communication with the person and openness to, going into something more difficult and challenging.
And who doesn't know when the compliment sandwich is being used on them, right?
I
Like,
know, they know, they know. They're like, okay, they're bracing for it. What's the
yeah.
bad part? Yeah.
Oh, here's another not to do thing. This was not something I experienced, but just recently, someone I knew, they got an email. Okay, we're going to meet on Saturday. And they got sent this invitation. Well, it was 5 days prior. And so they had a 5 whole days of not knowing that it was going to be a
Yes.
hard conversation based on who was on the meeting
Yep.
invite, them not being able to prepare, have all of this anxiety associated with that conversation.
Yep.
What a great example of lack of communication not being
Yep.
great, or just not understanding that human experience of them preparing to receive that bad news.
Yeah. 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 It's the most difficult thing. So yeah, having some of these tips for you, consider them. Makes the conversation, it's still hard, but then at least you're doing it with a human experience, with some compassion for the
Yes.
other person. And sometimes we don't do it, not you just maybe not knowingly. The person just probably sent the email 5 days ahead to
Right.
give them advance notice,
Right.
but then not really.
Thinking they're helping because their communication
Yeah.
style is like, I want to know, not recognizing the other
Right.
person's communication style is, I want to know, but I also want to know some of the details so that I can prepare
I can
myself. So
prepare.
yeah,
Right.
and that
Right.
that just goes back to the simplest way is like the head and the heart. I think logically. So if I'm a logical thinker,
Mhm.
then I'm the person that, like, when I'm experiencing communication, I process that in a logical way. If I'm a heart
Yeah.
thinker, I process all of the information I receive through my heart first. How does that make me feel? How is that other person feeling? And then the gut
Mm.
is like, I receive something and I'm like, gut feel, I'm going to do this. Like, there'll be much
Oh, I
more
like
of a
that.
quick decision. Yeah, it's oversimplified. It's present in almost all the personality typings if you kind of take a
Uh-huh.
step back.
Uh-huh.
Side note,
Uh-huh.
my favorite one is the Enneagram for that.
Uh-huh.
It's one of
Uh-huh.
my favorite examples of getting to know people and their communication styles and why they communicate
Right.
the way they do.
Right. 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 So important. And I love the idea of also when you mentioned the technology. I'm going to transition a little bit over to how do we use technology to speed up or make communication more effective with
Yeah.
projects on a project site. You work with a lot of construction sites. So how are they doing it now versus how can we help? How can you help? How can technology help?
Yeah, I mean, one of my biggest complaints about communication these days is email. It
Mm-hmm.
is a very free form tool, so you could use it
Mm-hmm.
however you want. You could
Mm-hmm.
use it for 2 sentences, you could use it for 10 paragraphs, right? And it's
Mm-hmm.
convenient. We almost always have it open. But some of the issues with email is it's not actionable. So unless you're a very diligent person who always creates a task when they receive an email, that's harder to stay on top of. Emails get lost. Not
Mm-hmm.
responding to somebody. I actually missed an email. Somebody texted me
Mm-hmm.
yesterday, like, hey, you haven't responded to this email. What's going on? I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, honestly, I just missed it. But, that whole
Mm-hmm.
thing of not responding to an email also can cause a person to feel like they're being ignored or they're not a
Mm-hmm.
priority. And of course, that's not your intention, but that's the result of it. So we work specifically with technology that does the digital form and workflow. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm
Mm-hmm.
a big believer in workflow, shared lists where everybody can see what everybody's doing. So the technology that we work with focuses specifically on projects in construction.
Mm-hmm.
But what it
Mm-hmm.
does is, what I love that it does is it's all in a shared database. So you have one source of truth,
Mm-hmm.
who's doing what, who's responsible for
Mm-hmm.
what. Nothing like an action item list that has responsible person as a single person and it's a
Mm-hmm.
required field, right?
Mm-hmm.
That sort of digital
Mm-hmm.
form drives the behavior of that one person saying, oh, I'm responsible for this next step. And then the workflow
Mm-hmm.
is really helping to prioritize when I'm done with my piece, now somebody else needs to do something. So when we look at the entire business process, it keeps it from this passive form of communication like email into this active form of communication via workflow. So that's a lot of what we do.
Is this something you developed? Is it a platform you developed, or is it something that you recommend or consult on?
Yeah, so we use a lot of industry standard platforms, probably. So we've done PM Web, we've done eBuilder. We focus most of our efforts on Kahua now, which is a low-code platform. Another really strong product is an Oracle Primavera product called Unifier. And so we've learned, and I am not an IT person. So this is actually where I get a little bit excited about how technology is changing, right? You said before, technology is not really a people thing. It's, we've seen it historically as something that's independent from how we do our daily work. And as technology is getting more accessible for folks that know a business process really well, but maybe didn't have a background in coding, now all of a sudden we're seeing technology starting to play a bigger role more effectively, right? It's always playing a big role in our lives, but using it more effectively, especially on communication and responding to folks.
Wait, is it because that they're able to develop something faster and easier?
Yeah.
Right.
So Unifier started becoming aware of Unifier. That was probably the first one. And if these are very specific industry tools, but some related tools that people might be a little more familiar with are the apps on your iPhone, or some people are familiar with Salesforce. So the software company provides a platform or a foundation for the software, and then it gives you tools to build out custom forms and workflow or apps on top of that. And so those are the tools that we're using that are not just in our industry, but are in a lot of industries where you can kind of see that shift.
Wow. That's amazing. I've gotten a huge mindset shift about integrating technology more and having it more be a part, as almost like a play, almost like part of the team.
Yeah, it's funny.
And then maybe it could be
it's a persona, right? When we do workflows, business process workflows, it's easiest to make it a persona or have an indication. Hey, this step is a manual step. This is a meeting that happens between people. This step, you have a little icon. This one happens in the technology, right? So it is integrated now into our business process.
Yeah. It's so important, so critical as business continues to evolve and it's going so fast, and having these systems and processes in place to support us and so that we can do more fun things.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
I mean, a great example of that is Excel, right? So it's a very serious joke that Excel is the number one reporting tool or technology tool that's used worldwide. Well, why? It's easy to learn, it's accessible, you can do whatever you want with it. But of course it has its own faults and issues. It's a single person. The person that created it is usually the only one that knows how to operate the more complex spreadsheets.
Oh my gosh, I just ran into that today.
Yes. What does this mean? Where are you getting this number for? What is this error coming from? And having to kind of chase that back. But it's a great discussion about, well, that tool is so flexible. That's why so many people use it. And I don't have to have a developer background in order to use this tool. So that's really what I think a lot of these technologies are working towards, is making something as easy to work with as something like in Excel.
Love it. Love it. I've learned so much today, Cari, and I'd like to close off with what is that one golden takeaway for the audience that you'd like to share?
We've kind of tipped on it, but I think, to kind of put it a little more concisely, it's the human side, right? So when we're talking about communication, we're talking about what we can do as leaders or coworkers. I think it's recognizing that we're all human at the end of the day. We bring our own, preconceived notions of what communication should and could look like. And so I think continuing to pay attention and educate yourself on different personalities, different communication styles, and then proactively having communication around that. It's again that creating that foundation as soon as you possibly can with a new team member or a new project team, so that you can continue to grow that instead of taking, a really long time to get to establish that trust and formation.
Love that. Thank you, Cari. So learning how to continue to have a human experience, build trust, be more productive even in our virtual digital world. Thank you so much for all of your tips, your strategies, your ideas to support us on that. Thank you, Cari. Thank you so much, audience, for being with us. I trust that you got what you needed today. And if you have any questions or have a business, construction business that you're running and you love a better workflow with digital, with technology, reach out to Cari. You can find her email and her information in our show notes. Thank you so much. Until next time, take care.
Thanks all.
Bye. Thanks for joining the conversation today. Are you curious on how you measure up with your ability to speak in flow? Come grab my free self-assessment at https://speakinflow.com/assessment. And I'll see you on the other side.